All right, so we're going to do a quick reaction video to the second Linus Tech Tips Linux challenge video that they put out. I'm going to do one for the first one, but I know that this is the most recent one, so let's do it this way. I'm just going to pause the video and talk about it when my time arises. Let's go.
Death to Microsoft! The open source community is ready to send you to your grave! Your tyrannical reign over PC gamers is at an end! Freedom! Is what I would say.
Yes, I understand the whole inside joke on this one, that a lot of Linux people are very into freedom and open source, and they will fight to the death for it. I get it.
If I lived with Linus Wallace III over here in Fantasyland, where any of that was true. So far, the 1 month Linux gaming challenge has been as advertised, a challenge. And in part 2,
that's what you get when you use Pop OS.
Luke and I are going to be taking it to the next level by not just gaming on Linux, but by recording and streaming our gameplay to viewers on Twitch. Now, I'd be lying if I said I'm not expecting some speed bumps. Pre-flight checklist of tasks to complete to be streaming ready. We'll need comms to chat and collaborate with our fellow creators, and software that's capable of capturing our gameplay, audio, and face cams.
And obviously we'll need the aforementioned audio interfaces and cameras both working.
We both use Elgato key lights, which we've always controlled using Windows software, so we'll both need to find a workaround for that.
And no points will be awarded for having an ugly or bad sounding stream. It's got to look every bit as legit from a viewer perspective as it did on Windows.
Yeah, one thing I'm going to say right now is that the UI UX experience on Linux is a little bit lacking. I think that's because a lot of developers care about the program. They care about the what it does, and a lot of people run programs from the command line. They don't even the GUI is a complete afterthought. So I get where they're coming from here. However, that being said, I am shooting this on OBS Studio on a Linux system, so.
Immediately, I started overthinking things. Sometimes that's the problem with knowing just enough to be dangerous. I tried to apt-get OBS, the industry standard for desktop capture and streaming, in the terminal, only to discover that Manjaro, the Linux distribution that I'm using, doesn't come with apt because apt is for managing packages on Debian and related OSs.
Yeah, there is different package managers for different distributions. Arch-based is Pacman, Debian is apt-get. I only use Pacman on the desktop, but I do use Debian-based systems on the server. And I mean, I get it's a little bit confusing, but you get the hang of it.
Oops. Making life more difficult, the message that comes up when you try to execute the command doesn't say, hey, you should probably be using Pacman, you dunce. It tries to install some kind of dependency for apt, then just quietly fails and prompts you to do the same thing again when you try to use it. Infinite loop, baby. Speaking of which, I had a panic moment when I checked OBS compatibility and found out that it is actually unsupported in Arch, by the way, and its derivatives.
Fair point, but a lot of packages are unsupported by the distribution maintainers. That's just because they don't manage them themselves. However, they do work on the distributions quite well. So.
But the good news is that upon launch, I was immediately relieved to find that it works exactly as expected, with some exceptions. For example, the NVENC new encoder doesn't show up as an option, which appears to be down to NVIDIA's poop-tastic drivers on Linux. Side note here, I always kind of assumed that the Linux community was grousing about NVIDIA primarily for their locked-down proprietary approach to things, and that it had less to do with the actual quality of the product. Now, I properly understand that it is definitely both.
That is a point of contention. I think that you can solve a lot of the issues by installing the proprietary NVIDIA drivers. A lot of people that use Linux don't want to do that. I get the ideology, but in order for me to run something like DaVinci Resolve, I have to install the proprietary drivers, it seems, and they do seem to work better for various programs. That being said, what is this font? I just noticed that, but I'm not sure what this is.
As mentioned, core product functionality from like a couple of years ago is missing. The control panel looks like it's from 10 years ago, and the interface is kind of confusing. Thankfully, I was able to enable G-Sync on my display, but for whatever reason, you allow it in order to actually turn it on, which you then verify in a completely different tab. And this kind of confusion is not a deal breaker. It's just obvious that the Linux software has never gotten the kind of TLC from the UX team that the Windows software does.
And that's kind of what I mentioned at the beginning of this video, is there is some lacking UI UX in the Linux side of things. I think a lot of people are doing this through the command line, and that's probably why there's a little bit of afterthought. But I get where Linus is coming from here.
For me, acquiring OBS was no problem. I just got it from the package manager and it was all okay. Once installed though, we noticed something. Window capture on Linux can be a little problematic. We couldn't seem to get it working at all at the start. I had an option for it, but it didn't work, and Linus didn't even have that. But a few days later, I tried it again for a different project, and it worked just fine. I checked in with Linus and his did too. Neither of us know what might have fixed it, but that's cool, I guess.
The beauty of using open source software. Sometimes something won't work for me, and then a day later it does because somebody, well, after I update my system, somebody has written a patch for it. It's kind of cool to be involved with. I get the frustration. That being said, when I was filming this, I'm filming this on OBS too. I had to reopen the window just so that it recognized my webcam. Wasn't doing it. Had to take the source down and put it back up. I get the frustrations.
The bigger issue for me ended up being the software that just doesn't exist. There are third-party tools, for example, that allow key remapping. Keyboarding Master is evidently a popular one. But if your peripherals have a manufacturer-provided tool that is used to reconfigure RGB lighting, or the lift-off distance of your mouse, or the sensitivity steps of your DPI button, then get ready to install Windows in a virtual machine, pass those devices through, configure them, and then hand them back over to Linux. It's extremely tedious and doesn't even remotely restore full functionality.
You have the technical ability to start a VM, pass through all of your peripherals and do that, but you can't get versus Pac-Man? One thing that when I used to game, I ran both a Windows and a Linux system on my desktop. And when I made changes to the hardware in the Windows system, it does generally carry over to the Linux side of things if it's stored in hardware. If it's not, if it's a software solution, then you're kind of shit out of luck. That being said, there's a bunch of different ways you can map keys on Linux systems, depending on what you use for display environment or window manager. You can use hotkey daemons, you can use the system settings. And when it comes to RGB, I have no comment. Continue.
For example, don't expect to get a low battery warning for your G Pro wireless mouse. And it's even worse for my audio interface. The Go XLR has a handful of unique features, including decent preamps, reprogrammable screen labels, a built-in soundboard function, and the infamous beep button that I am so fond of using during my live streams. About the kind of bullshit that NVIDIA puts them through, I'll have it in the affiliate link down below, by the way. The bad news about it is that, as far as I can tell, TC Helicon has given exactly zero thought to Linux whatsoever. But wait, there's a solution. All I have to do is follow these simple instructions to download a random script off GitHub and run it, with no indication given whatsoever for how exactly to run a script.
There is some cost of entry when you're coming over to Linux and understanding how to run scripts and how to use Git. I think that they're going to talk about that too, is one of the cost of entry. This program, I'm not sure if it's run or maintained by the developers of the hardware. One of the cool things about open source is that this may be somebody like you or me that's maintaining a GitHub repository so that you can use this on Linux. It is kind of cool.
Even the process of downloading it was unintuitive. And I know GitHub is for developers and not for end users, but It's really hard to hide behind that shield when it took me less than 2 days to run into a situation where I had to use it. I mean, at that point, if GitHub is only for developers, then desktop Linux is only for developers.
Developers, sysadmins, people that use technology. GitHub's kind of like, again, I said it's a point of entry, but to learn how to use Git is a valuable skill. And if you're using it in your job, it's a skill that kind of, when you become a developer, or sysadmin or whatever, it's one of the very first things that you learn. It takes a couple hours to get a hang of it. It's frustrating. I've dealt with it personally, but once you do get it, the way that you download packages and everything through the command line, it's far more simple than just doing what Linus is doing here.
You can't have it both ways, unlike on LTT Store, where you can find great merch at fair prices. Our mouse mats are rated 5 stars with literally thousands of reviews. Go see what all the fuss is about at the link below. Anyway, I found a guide on how to run a script. I'm grateful for that, but I'm frustrated by the condescending tone. I mean, my assumption that a file with a .sh extension would behave as I would expect it to and launch in some kind of script running application doesn't seem that unreasonable. Newsflash, random contributor, you can also change a file extension in Windows, and it will attempt to launch in the default program for that file type. It actually serves exactly the same fundamental purpose, hinting at the contents of the file. The only difference is that these hints for the user are also used as hints for the operating system. It's actually a lot more convenient than digging into the properties of the file to find out what it does.
Depends on your file manager. Sometimes most of them will open files that are as such, named as such in the proper ways. When it comes to scripts, I think, again, command line here is really the ultimate answer. And if you go to script files, in the initial line of the script, you have kind of what it is. It's a script. It has usually /bin/ /bash, because it's a bash script. You just have to go into the file and see it. But
anyway, pompous tone aside, that contributor did help me figure out my GitHub download. So it turns out that right-click Save Target As gets you an HTML file in .sh clothing because, I don't know, some borderline arbitrary reason probably.
I'm not sure why he's using Git like this. You should be cloning the repositories to your machine and doing it that way. It's much simpler, actually.
And in order to get it to be an actual .sh file, I had to copy it into a text editor, Kate, and then save that as a
Don't use Kate.
script and execute it in the terminal. It spat out a bunch of
Again, this is kind of like, this is the desire to not use a command line here is making things more difficult.
errors, and as I expected, most of the buttons don't work, but all the inputs and outputs that I had already configured in Windows did show up. My faders work. I even have my button until my GoXLR loses power for any reason, at which point I will have to pass it through to Windows, reconfigure it in Windows, and then pass it back over to Linux without losing power. Compared to that, all the other stuff is minor.
I can't comment on that because I don't know exactly what he's talking about. Generally, when it comes to peripherals, for me, I've been plug and play. Like, I can plug in my Scarlett XLR input for this mic and everything. It works no problem. Never had to configure anything. System just sees it. Same thing with pretty much keyboard, mouse, etc.
I hope.
The most notable issue I had was that my audio devices were just kind of screwy in OBS. My voice came across very unnaturally deep, and it sounded like my mic input had been duplicated.
My voice just feels deep right now. I don't know if I've got something lodged or what.
And
yeah.
Chat was pretty convinced that I had set something up incorrectly, and if I was a viewer of my stream, I probably would have said the same thing. But I've been using OBS for like 6 or 7 years now, so I had my doubts. I even streamed my OBS settings panel to prove it, but eventually, feeling out of options, I just restarted OBS, and yeah, that solved pretty much everything. Which was kind of frustrating, because I've heard time and time again that you don't have to turn things off and on again to get them working in Linux, but
You do.
hey, maybe that's just because I'm not really great at Linux yet. Maybe there's something else I could have done. Not sure. On the good side of things though, my mixers worked flawlessly from the start. Though it is pretty simple as far as mixers go. I didn't have to change any settings, I didn't have to install anything for it, I just set it as my default input device and was good to go.
That's my experience as well.
Once I got PAMAC figured out, getting comms going was surprisingly simple. PAMAC is a program with a graphical user interface that functions similarly to the Pacman package manager that you operate in the terminal. At least it does once you find the hidden button in PAMAC to search snap, flatpak, and Arch user repository entry.
The Arch user repository is so good, I would avoid using snap and flatpak because you're going to create a bunch of conflicts on your system and you're going to you're gonna have a bad time. If you use strictly the Arch user repository and the community repository, I think you have 98 to 99% of the programs in those repositories.
It's basically like the Pop Shop from Pop! OS, except it didn't try to brick my system the first time I used it. The only really difficult thing was choosing the right package to install for Discord. There's regular Discord, and then there's Canary Discord, whatever that is. I chose the most official looking package, and I was up and running almost immediately once I found the super convenient per application volume mixer in the bottom right corner. The interface is kind of kludgy, like scrolling with your mouse wheel scrolls through both the audio devices and the levels of the individual devices, which is not great. But other than that, it works really well, and my first voice call to Luke went completely without a hitch. Or it would have if I'd known that it was starting. Unfortunately, I actually still have not figured out how to get desktop notifications working. I found a guide, but the instructions fell apart almost immediately when my Discord package didn't show up in the list.
You can also use Discord in the browser. I mean, that would probably alleviate some of these issues. That being said, I don't use Discord.
Where it's supposed to be for me to fix it. I think that's probably a project for another day.
Discord was an easy install for me. Again, it was just automatically available in Package Manager. That being said, there was certain missing features. Screen sharing across Slack, Teams, and Discord are kind of sketchy at best. They feel less stable, or they're even missing some features here and there. Outside of that, there's even really simple stuff missing every now and then. Like if I download a file in Slack and then try to click the Open Containing Folder button, just nothing happens. And speaking of missing features, I used the phone app for the Elgato Control Center just like Linus did. I had found another solution through a script on GitHub, but I thought that way would potentially be problematic in the long term, so I just avoided it. Unfortunately for my camera, however, Canon EOS Utilities doesn't work on Linux. I'd been using that software on Windows for quite a while now to get a live feed from my Canon 70D over USB to my computer. It was flawless and didn't require a capture card. I do have an AVIO 4K capture card, which does work on Linux, but I don't have the micro HDMI cable that it would need to connect to my camera. I could pick one up, but just for this challenge, I decided to go with my old Logitech C920, which while it doesn't remotely look as good, it works just fine, and when you make the window for it really small, no one can really tell.
I think overall the easiest part for me was getting my Camlink 4K up and running. It was garbled when I selected one of the duplicate sources in OBS, but immediately after trying the second one, it cleared up and has been picture perfect ever since. So it works, but there's a much larger upfront investment in getting it working. The question is just whether it feels worth it.
In the end, it worked. If you connected to the stream after we were done about 15 minutes of troubleshooting while we were just in the thick of trying not to starve, I'm sure any random viewer wouldn't have been able to tell a difference between one of my old Windows streams and this one. Audio was good, capture was good. That's where the good ends, however. Literally everything I used past this point was a lesser experience compared to its Windows counterpart. Almost everything was missing at least one feature, and some, I'd say most notably OBS and Teams, were just buggy, requiring restarts for simple settings to actually apply, and had other various problems. It definitely wasn't.
Teams I have no comment on. I would assume that as a Microsoft service, you'd run into some issues on Linux. OBS, I've never had really that many issues.
Impossible, and it was actually easier than I expected. But due to various bugs, missing features, and incompatible software, it wasn't as simple or clean as doing it on Windows. But I wouldn't say that was enough for it to be a deal breaker.
For me, the bottom line is what you're looking to get out of it. If you're daily driving Linux for game streaming out of a genuine passion for learning more about it, then have at it, have fun, but just know what you're getting into. PC gaming already requires a certain amount of tinkering. I mean, there's a reason that more people game on consoles. You know, whether it's trying to track down save files in some Vista era folder or forcing an aspect ratio in an INI file. But a Linux gaming PC, it requires all of that crap and then another mountain of crap on top of it.
There's a fair point. Like when I used to game on Windows, there was still issues that I came across where games crashed and I had to go into the files and do a bunch of different things, depending on the game, of course. Some of the games ran flawlessly, no issues whatsoever. But that's the fun thing with Linux is that the way that things are going with the Steam community and Valve at the forefront, and also with the portable device out there, the Steam Deck, I believe it's called. I think that this is only going to get continually better on a Linux machine. That being said, there's always bugs when it comes to computers. Always. It's unavoidable, but a lot of the games that are coming over are 100% playable, some of them even online. I was looking today just out of curiosity, but Rocket League, for example, is a essentially native experience on Linux. That's very, like, 5 years ago, you would have never, ever considered something like that. So we'll see what their closing statements are. But I had problems with Windows too. It's just the nature of the beast when it comes to computers.
Like when something doesn't work, you can tell yourself, well, I never wanted to use that functionality, or I never wanted to play that game anyway. But honestly, it just comes across as sour grapes. It is not that easy to use. The good news, though, is that a shocking number of experiences don't start and end with, sorry, you can't do this. So stay tuned for part 3, where Luke and I are going to be trying to get as many games up and running as possible, starting with Twitch's top 20 and then expanding into some of our personal favorites. It's going to be a really good one. Just like this message from our sponsor. It's sponsors like that are going to put him through college. Want to say hi to YouTube?
Hi.
All right, he wanted to be in the video. Okay.
Good video. I think that they are giving this a fair go through the eyes of somebody that wants to game and like wants to come over and not spend the $100 and whatever it is to install Windows on their computer after building a computer. I get it. And I think that these videos are only going to encourage more and more development in the Linux gaming community. It's only going to push these developers that are developing, these tools for, I think, one of the pieces of hardware you mentioned, to make it better. And that's the beauty of open source communities, is that they see something wrong and they fix it. Whereas when you have a company maintaining these code bases or these games or these programs or whatever, you're at the mercy of those companies. One thing that I love about Linux is that, hey, I have a problem. Somebody else probably had that problem too, and they may have even built a solution for that problem. All I have to do is do a quick search, and you know what? It may be solved already for me. And the one thing that you're going to notice about this video when it comes out and they finish this challenge, a lot of these problems aren't going to exist anymore. And that's really cool. So I have to give them props for going down the experiencing it, going through the motions and the ups and downs of using a Linux system for gaming and for daily driving, really, because that's what they're doing. I'll close with this. If you're wanting to use a Linux system, you have to have a sense of experimentation, exploration, and understand that you're going to break things. When you first start with it, you are probably going to have to reinstall your distribution a couple times. But 3 years on, for me, like, I don't have to do that anymore. I don't run into those issues. And if I do run into an issue, I generally am able to solve it. But that comes with the confidence and the ability to use these systems. You have to stick with it. And eventually you do come to a point where, you know what, I am a super user now because I went through all the ups and downs and the breakings and the tears and everything. But yeah, good video. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do in part 3, and I'll do a review on part 1 just because why not? Catch you guys in the next one. Thanks so much for watching.